The coffee machine gurgled in protest as Jack Forrester attempted to coax one more cup from the ancient appliance. He glanced at the clock 6:15 a.m., exactly 15 minutes before he needed to wake his 7-year-old daughter, Lily, for school. These precious morning moments were often his only solitude, a brief respite before the whirlwind of single parenthood resumed its relentless pace. "Come on, you overpriced piece of junk," he muttered, tapping the side of the machine with calculated gentleness. The coffee maker had been a splurge 3 years ago, back when his architectural firm had been thriving and before his ex-wife had left them both for a simpler life in Colorado with her yoga instructor. Now, like everything else in his life, it was hanging on by a thread. The machine finally sputtered to life, dispensing a thin stream of coffee into his waiting mug. Jack sighed with relief and carried his prize to the small kitchen table, which was covered with Lily's homework, bills marked "Final Notice," and sketches for client pitches that kept getting rejected. At 34, Jack hadn't imagined this would be his life, struggling to keep his small, independent architecture practice afloat, while raising a daughter alone in a too expensive apartment they could barely afford. But Lily needed stability, needed to stay in her school with her friends, especially after her mother's departure had turned her world upside down. His phone buzzed with a calendar notification. Library 4:30 p.m. Jack smiled. Thursdays were library days. No matter how tight money got, books remained free, and Lily's love of reading was something he was determined to nurture. "Daddy," a small voice called from the hallway. Lily stood there in mismatched pajamas, her blonde hair a wild tangle around her face. "Hey, princess, you're up early." Jack quickly shuffled the bills under a folder. "I heard the coffee machine fighting with you again," she said, climbing onto his lap. "Did it win?" "We called it a draw." Jack kissed the top of her head. "Want some breakfast?" Lily nodded, and Jack set about making oatmeal, the affordable breakfast staple they'd been eating most mornings. As he stirred honey into the pot, a luxury he allowed because Lily loved it, he ran through his mental to-do list for the day. Drop Lily at school, meet with a potential client who probably couldn't afford his already reduced rates, pick Lily up, library, dinner, bedtime. What he didn't know was that his carefully planned Thursday was about to veer wildly off course. The day progressed normally until Jack entered the public library that afternoon, Lily's small hand in his. The central branch was a magnificent old building with soaring ceilings and intricate woodwork, the kind of architecture that had inspired him to enter the field in the first place. "Can I go to the kids section?" Lily asked, already pulling toward the colorful corner filled with bean-bag chairs and low shelves. "You know the rules, stay where I can see you, and no more than 5 books today." Their apartment could barely contain the growing collection of library books that Lily cycled through weekly. As Lily scampered off, Jack settled at a table with a clear view of the children's area and pulled out his laptop. Maybe he could work on that proposal while Lily browsed. That's when he noticed her, a woman in her early 30s, standing at a computer terminal, her brow furrowed in concentration. She was striking, with dark curly hair pulled back in a loose bun and warm brown skin that seemed to glow under the library's soft lighting. She wore simple jeans and a gray cashmere sweater that somehow looked both casual and expensive. But it wasn't her appearance that caught Jack's attention. It was her expression, a mixture of confusion and growing distress. She was speaking quietly into her cell phone, her free hand gesturing emphatically. "That doesn't sound right," he heard her say as her voice rose slightly. "Why would you need my account information again?" Jack's attention sharpened. He'd read enough articles about scams to recognize the warning signs. The woman continued, "You're saying there's a problem with my donation, but I've already provided all the verification you asked for yesterday." Without thinking, Jack stood up and walked over. He knew it wasn't his business, but something protective in him couldn't stand by. "Excuse me," he said quietly. The woman looked up, startled. Her eyes were a deep amber color, currently widened in surprise. "I couldn't help overhearing." "Is someone asking for your financial information?" She covered the phone with her hand. "It's the children's charity I donate to. They're saying there's a problem with my last transaction." Jack felt a sinking feeling. "Would you mind if I listened for a moment?" I've read about some scams targeting generous people. The woman hesitated, then nodded and put the phone on speaker. Need to verify the account again, madam, a man's voice was saying. It's just our standard security protocol when a transaction this large is flagged. May I? Jack gestured to the phone. After another moment's hesitation, she handed it to him. Hello, this is Jack Forrester, a financial security consultant, he lied smoothly. Which charity did you say you're representing? There was a pause before the man responded, Global Children's Relief Fund, sir. Interesting. And what's your employee ID number? The line went dead immediately. Jack handed the phone back. I'm sorry, but that was definitely a scammer. Global Children's Relief is a legitimate organization, but they would never call asking for account information like that. The woman's face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and relief. Oh my God, I almost gave them, she stopped herself. Thank you. I should have known better, but they had so many details about my previous donations. These scammers are getting sophisticated, Jack said. They probably found information about your charitable giving online. Grace, she said, extending her hand. Grace Fletcher. Jack Forrester, he replied, shaking her hand. Her grip was firm and confident. And that's my daughter Lily over there, currently trying to smuggle what appears to be 7 books into her backpack despite our 5-book limit. Grace laughed, a warm sound that made something in Jack's chest loosen slightly. She's adorable. How old is she? 7 going on 17, Jack said with a smile, and too smart for her own good. Daddy, Lily called, struggling with her overstuffed backpack. I narrowed it down to 6, that's almost 5. Jack excused himself and went to negotiate with his daughter, eventually agreeing to a compromise of 6 books with the solemn promise that one would be finished by Saturday. When he turned back, he was surprised to find Grace still standing there, watching their interaction with a soft smile. Sorry about that, he said. Don't be, it was sweet. She hesitated. Listen, I feel like I owe you a coffee or something for potentially saving me from a major headache. Jack's pride wanted to refuse, but his practical side recognized the rarity of adult conversation that wasn't about client invoices or school permission slips. That's really not necessary. Please, she insisted. There's a cafe right across the street, unless you have to rush off. Jack checked his watch. It was only 5:15 and dinner was just leftovers anyway. I suppose we have time for a quick one. Lily, would you like a hot chocolate with whipped cream? Lily asked, her eyes lighting up. Just this once, Jack said, knowing he said the same thing every time. The cafe was cozy and half empty. After they ordered a simple black coffee for Jack, a latte for Grace, and the promised hot chocolate for Lily, Grace insisted on paying despite Jack's protests. So, financial security consultant, Grace asked with a raised eyebrow once they were seated. Jack laughed. Yeah, sorry about that. I'm actually an architect with a very protective streak apparently. Well, I'm glad for that streak today. She stirred her latte thoughtfully. Have you always been an architect since I finished graduate school 10 years ago? I have my own small practice now, though small might be generous. It's basically just me and occasionally a freelance drafter when things get busy. Which kinds of projects do you work on? As Jack described his work, mostly residential renovations with a few small commercial projects, he found himself relaxing. Grace asked insightful questions and seemed genuinely interested in his explanations of sustainable design and preservation challenges. Meanwhile, Lily had pulled out one of her library books and was deeply absorbed, occasionally surfacing to take a sip of her hot chocolate, leaving a whipped cream mustache that made Grace smile. What about you? Jack finally asked. What do you do? Something flickered across Grace's face, hesitation, perhaps before she answered. I work in finance, investment management mostly. Hence the donations that caught the scammer's attention, Jack nodded. I believe in giving back, she said simply. My parents taught me that. Their conversation flowed easily, skimming across topics from favorite buildings in the city to books they'd enjoyed recently. Jack couldn't remember the last time he'd had such an effortless conversation with someone new. When Jack glanced at his watch again, he was startled to see that almost an hour had passed. We should probably get going. Dinner and homework await. Was it his imagination or did Grace look disappointed? Of course, thank you again for your help today. Anytime, Jack said, meaning it. Come on, Lily, time to go home. Lily reluctantly closed her book and gathered her things. It was nice meeting you, Miss Grace, she said politely. You too, Lily, I like your taste in books. The Secret Garden was one of my favorites when I was your age. Lily's eyes widened. Really? It's my favorite too. As they stood to leave, Grace suddenly said, Jack, I know this might seem forward, but would you be interested in getting dinner sometime? Without the scam drama, Jack was taken aback. Women like Grace put together, successful, beautiful, didn't usually ask him out. Especially not when he was in his work clothes with his daughter in tow. I'd like that, he said before he could overthink it. They exchanged numbers, and Jack left the cafe feeling lighter than he had in months. That night, after Lily was asleep, Jack found himself researching Grace Fletcher online. It wasn't stalking, he told himself, just due diligence before going out with someone who would potentially be around his daughter. What he found made his coffee nearly slip from his hand. Grace Fletcher wasn't just in finance, she was the founder and CEO of Fletcher Ethical Investments, a wildly successful firm that specialized in socially responsible investing. The company managed billions in assets, and Grace herself had been featured in Forbes and Fortune. She was, in short, way out of his league. Jack closed his laptop, feeling a mixture of admiration and dread. No wonder she'd been targeted by scammers, and no wonder she'd hesitated before describing her job. His phone pinged with a text. This is Grace from the library. Just wanted to make sure I had the right number. Still up for dinner Saturday? I know a place with amazing pasta. Jack stared at the message. He should probably make up an excuse. What could a millionaire CEO possibly want with a struggling single dad who had been impressed by the free coffee at the client meeting he'd had that morning? But before he could talk himself out of it, he replied, looking forward to it. Just need to arrange a sitter for Lily. Grace's response came quickly. Perfect, and Jack, I'm really glad you stopped that scammer today. Despite his misgivings, Jack smiled. Saturday couldn't come soon enough. Finding a babysitter on short notice proved challenging, but Jack's neighbor Mrs. Rodriguez, a retired teacher who adored Lily, agreed to help out. By Saturday evening, Jack was standing in front of his closet, realizing with dismay that his nice clothes options were severely limited. He settled on his one good suit, slightly outdated but well-maintained, and a blue shirt that his sister had once said brought out his eyes. Looking in the mirror, he tried to see himself as Grace might. Tall, reasonably fit from carrying building materials and chasing after a 7-year-old, with brown hair that needed a cut and blue eyes that looked tired but hopeful. You look handsome, Daddy, Lily said from the doorway, clutching her stuffed rabbit. Thanks, Princess. He knelt down to her level. You're going to be good for Mrs. Rodriguez, right? Bed by 8:30 and no negotiating for extra stories. I know the rules, Lily said with the world-weary sigh of a child who had heard the same instructions countless times. Then, more seriously, is this like a date? Jack hesitated. Yes, it is. Like how you and Mommy used to go on dates, Jack's heart squeezed painfully. Kind of, but different too. Grace is just a new friend right now. Lily considered this. I like her. She knows about good books. That's a strong recommendation, Jack said, smiling after Mrs. Rodriguez arrived, and he'd gone through the usual instructions, emergency numbers on the fridge, Lily's allergy medicine in the bathroom cabinet. Jack headed out to meet Grace at the restaurant she'd chosen. The moment he saw the place, his stomach sank. Luciano's was one of the most exclusive Italian restaurants in the city, the kind of establishment where reservations were needed months in advance unless you were someone important. Which, he reminded himself, Grace clearly was. She was already seated when he arrived, looking stunning in a simple black dress with a gold necklace that caught the light. Jack was suddenly acutely aware of his suit's slightly frayed cuffs. Jack, she said, standing to greet him with a warm smile, I'm so glad you could make it. I almost didn't recognize you without a scammer on the phone, he joked, trying to hide his nervousness. Grace laughed. I promise a drama-free evening. Well, unless you count the owner's tendency to sing opera tableside after his third glass of wine. As they settled in, Jack tried not to wince at the menu prices. Even the appetizers cost more than he typically spent on dinner for himself and Lily for an entire week. Grace must have noticed his expression because she said quietly, "I hope you don't mind, but I took the liberty of asking Chef Marco to prepare his tasting menu for us. He's an old friend, and he's been experimenting with some new dishes he wants feedback on." Jack recognized the graceful way she was handling the situation, allowing him to enjoy the meal without worrying about the cost, while framing it as a favor to the chef rather than charity. "That sounds great," he said, relaxing slightly. "Though I should warn you, my culinary expertise extends primarily to perfecting grilled cheese sandwiches for a very particular 7-year-old critic." "I'll have you know that's a valuable skill," Grace said seriously. "I can manage complex financial portfolios, but I burn toast with alarming consistency." The meal that followed was extraordinary course after course of exquisite Italian cuisine, paired with wines that the sommelier insisted were essential companions to each dish. Throughout it all, Jack and Grace talked, really talked, in the way people do when they're genuinely interested in learning about each other. Jack found himself opening up about his struggles, the challenge of maintaining his business while being a full-time parent, his ex-wife's departure 2 years ago, his determination to give Lily stability despite their financial challenges. "The hardest part is the constant worry," he admitted as they shared a dessert of tiramisu. "Worrying that a client will back out, that I won't make rent, that Lily will somehow feel the stress even though I try to shield her from it." Grace listened attentively, without the pity or discomfort that sometimes crossed people's faces when he was honest about his situation. "It sounds like you're doing an amazing job in incredibly difficult circumstances," she said. "Lily is lucky to have you. What about you?" Jack asked, realizing they'd spent most of the evening talking about him. "I may have done some light internet research after we met." Grace winced. "So you know about the company." "I know you're slightly more than in finance," he said with a smile. "Why didn't you mention it?" She twisted her napkin thoughtfully. "When people find out what I do, what I have, it changes things. Conversations become about my money rather than about me. And dating." She trailed off. "Let's just say I've had some experiences that made me cautious." Jack could imagine. Gold diggers. "Some," she acknowledged. "But more often, it's men who either feel threatened by my success or see me as some sort of trophy to be won. Neither is particularly appealing." She looked directly at him. "When you came to my rescue at the library, you had no idea who I was. You were just being kind." "That's rare." "It wasn't entirely selfless," Jack admitted. "I thought you were beautiful, and it gave me an excuse to talk to you." Grace's smile was worth any embarrassment the confession caused. "Well, I'm glad for your ulterior motives then." As the evening ended and they stepped outside the restaurant, Jack felt a mixture of elation and resignation. The night had been perfect, better than any date he could remember, but he couldn't shake the feeling that their worlds were too different for this to go anywhere. "I had a wonderful time," Grace said, standing close enough that he could smell her perfume, something subtle and elegant. "Me too," Jack said honestly. "Thank you for dinner. It was incredible." "Would it be too forward to ask about a second date?" Grace asked, surprising him again. Jack hesitated. "Grace, you're amazing, but I have to be realistic. You run a billion-dollar company. I'm a single dad who sometimes has to choose between paying the electricity bill and buying new shoes for my growing daughter. Those aren't exactly compatible worlds." "I think that's for us to decide, not some arbitrary social rule," Grace said firmly. "I like you, Jack. I like your integrity, your dedication to Lily, the way you talk about architecture with such passion. Money is just money. It doesn't define who I am any more than your challenges define you." "It's not just about the money," Jack said, though of course it partly was. "It's about lifestyles, expectations. I can't jet off to Paris for the weekend or attend charity galas. My idea of luxury is ordering pizza instead of making it from scratch." Grace stepped closer. "Jack, I grew up in a middle-class household in Queens. My parents were teachers. I got lucky with my company, but that's not who I am at my core. And maybe, just maybe, I find the idea of homemade pizza night with you and Lily far more appealing than another stuffy gala where everyone wants something from me." Before Jack could respond, She leaned forward and kissed him softly at first, then with increasing certainty. When they finally broke apart, Jack felt slightly dazed. "One more date," Grace said. "But this time, something simple, something you would normally do with Lily. Let me into your world instead of trying to figure out how you'd fit into mine." How could he say no to that? Their second date was the following weekend, a trip to the Natural History Museum with Lily, followed by hot dogs from a street vendor and ice cream in the park. Jack had been nervous about including Lily, but Grace had insisted she wanted to get to know them both. The day was gloriously ordinary. Grace wore jeans and a sweater, her hair in a simple ponytail, and she seemed genuinely delighted by Lily's endless questions about dinosaurs and outer space. When a little boy accidentally bumped into Grace and spilled ice cream on her sweater, she laughed it off completely. Even though Jack was certain it had cost more than his entire outfit, more dates followed, each one deepening their connection. Movie nights at Jack's apartment, where Grace brought popcorn and candy and sat through animated films without complaint. A day trip to the beach where they built sandcastles with Lily and talked for hours as the sun set. A weekend morning where Grace showed up with bagels and ended up helping Jack fix the leaky bathroom sink, getting thoroughly soaked in the process. With each meeting, the financial gap between them seemed to matter less. Jack found himself forgetting about Grace's wealth for long stretches, seeing only her kindness, her sharp intelligence, her surprising competitiveness at board games, and the gentle way she interacted with Lily. 3 months into their relationship, however, reality intruded harshly. Jack had just lost a major client, a renovation project that would have kept his business stable for months, when he received notice that his rent was increasing by 15%. The timing couldn't have been worse, and for the first time since his divorce, he wasn't sure how he was going to make ends meet. Grace knew something was wrong the moment she arrived for their planned dinner at his apartment. Lily was already in bed, and Jack had barely started cooking. "What happened?" Grace asked, setting down the wine she'd brought and coming to wrap her arms around him. Jack leaned into her embrace, allowing himself a moment of weakness. "Richardson canceled the project, and the landlord is raising the rent. I'm not sure I can keep the apartment, which means Lily might have to change schools," and his voice cracked slightly. "Jack, let me help," Grace said softly. "I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes." He pulled away. "I can't take your money, Grace." "Why not? Because of pride. Is pride worth uprooting Lily from her school, her friends?" "It's not that simple," Jack said, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "If I start relying on you financially, it changes everything between us. I need to know I can stand on my own." "That's ridiculous," Grace countered. "If the situations were reversed, would you hesitate to help me?" "That's different. Because I'm a woman. Or because you think less of yourself than you should." The argument that followed was their first real fight, intense and painful, with both of them saying things they didn't entirely mean. It ended with Grace leaving in tears, and Jack sitting alone in his kitchen, wondering if he'd just ruined the best relationship he'd had in years because of stubborn pride. 3 days passed without communication between them. Jack was miserable, and even Lily noticed, asking repeatedly when Grace was coming over again. He threw himself into finding new clients, making cold calls and sending out proposals to anyone who might need an architect, while also looking at smaller, cheaper apartments they might move to. On the 4th day, there was a knock at his office door. Jack looked up to find Grace standing there, looking as tired as he felt. "Can we talk?" she asked. They walked to a nearby park and sat on a bench overlooking a small pond. For a few minutes, neither spoke. "I've been thinking about what you said," Grace finally began. "About needing to stand on your own. I understand that better than you might think. When I started my company, everyone thought I was crazy to turn down outside investors, but I needed to know I could build it myself." Jack nodded, relieved she understood. "But Jack, there's a difference between independence and isolation. Letting someone help you doesn't diminish your strength. It just means you're human like the rest of us." "I know," he admitted. I've spent so long doing everything alone, being responsible for everything, that accepting help feels like failure." Grace took his hand. What if we look at it differently, not as charity, but as investment? Investment. Yes, I believe in you and your work. What if I invested in your firm? Properly, legally, with contracts and everything. You expand, hire a few people, take on bigger projects. You maintain creative control, of course. Jack was stunned. You do that, as a business arrangement, with very favorable terms, Grace smiled. But yes, a real business arrangement. Because I've seen your designs, Jack. You're incredibly talented. With the right backing, your firm could be extraordinary. For the first time, Jack allowed himself to consider it seriously. Not as a handout, but as an opportunity, one that could secure Lily's future and allow him to pursue the kinds of projects he'd always dreamed of. I'd need to think about it, he said slowly. Talk to a lawyer, do it properly. Of course, Grace agreed. Take all the time you need. She squeezed his hand. But no, this isn't about the money for me. It's about you, about believing in you the way you believed in me when you stopped that scammer at the library. Jack turned to face her fully. I've missed you these past few days. I've missed you too. So has my team, who had to endure me being absolutely unbearable all week. They laughed together, the tension finally broken. There's something else I need to say, Jack continued, suddenly serious. Regardless of what happens with the business proposal, I need you to know that I love you. Not your money, not your company, you, Grace Fletcher, the woman who quotes Shakespeare when she's nervous and can't make toast to save her life. Grace's eyes filled with tears. I love you too, Jack, more than I thought possible. 6 months later, Jack stood in the doorway of his new office, still unable to believe the transformation. Forrester Architectural Design had expanded to a team of 5, with a beautiful workspace in a converted warehouse, and a portfolio of exciting projects that balanced commercial success with the socially conscious design principles he'd always valued. The investment from Grace, structured as a proper business deal with terms that were generous but not charity, had allowed him to stabilize his finances, keep Lily in her school, and even start saving for her college fund. More importantly, it had given him the freedom to create the kind of work he'd always dreamed of. His phone buzzed with a text from Grace. Still on for dinner tonight. I made reservations at that new place near your apartment. Jack smiled as he replied, Actually, can we do pizza at home instead? Lily's been asking to show you her science project, and I thought a quiet night might be nice. The response came almost immediately. Perfect, that sounds wonderful, I'll bring ice cream. As he put his phone away, Jack reflected on how much had changed in a year. From that chance meeting in the library to now partners in every sense of the word, building something beautiful together. That evening, as the three of them sat around his kitchen table eating pizza and laughing at Lily's dramatic retelling of a playground incident, Jack caught Grace's eye across the table. She smiled at him with such warmth that it still took his breath away. Later, after Lily was asleep and they were curled up on the couch together, Grace said quietly, I've been thinking about the future. Oh, Jack said, running his fingers through her hair. My lease is up next month, and I spend most nights here anyway. Jack's heart skipped. Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting? If you and Lily are ready, I'd like us to live together, Grace said. Not in my place, it's never felt like a real home. Here with you too. Are you sure? This apartment isn't exactly what you're used to, Grace laughed. Jack, when will you understand? This apartment, with the creaky floorboards and the bathroom door that sticks and the kitchen where we make pancakes on Sunday mornings, this is exactly what I want. You and Lily are what I want. Jack pulled her closer. In that case, Grace Fletcher, would you do me the honor of moving in with us? Creaky floorboards and all, absolutely, she said, kissing him softly. It's the best investment I'll ever make. 1 year later, they stood together in the backyard of their new home, a beautiful but modest house with a garden for Lily to play in and a home office for Jack's growing business. Friends and family surrounded them as they exchanged vows under an arch that Jack had designed himself. Lily, serving proudly as flower girl, beamed as she watched her father marry the woman who had become her friend, her confidante, and now, officially, her stepmother. As they shared their first dance as husband and wife, Grace whispered in Jack's ear, "Who would have thought that a scammer would lead me to the love of my life?" Jack held her close, marveling at how a moment of instinctive protection in a library had changed everything. "I'm just glad I was nosy enough to interfere." "Your nosiness saved me thousands of dollars," Grace teased, "and led me to something priceless," Jack replied, kissing her as their guests applauded. In the years that followed, their family grew first with the arrival of their son, Noah, and later with twin girls, Emma and Olivia. Jack's architectural firm became known for innovative, sustainable designs that revitalized struggling neighborhoods, while Grace's company continued to set new standards for ethical investing. But for all their professional success, it was the quiet moments they cherished most. Family dinners around their kitchen table, weekend trips to the beach, bedtime stories with all 4 children piled onto one bed. The life they built together wasn't defined by wealth or status, but by love, respect, and the genuine partnership they'd formed that day in the library. And sometimes, when they told their story to new friends, Jack would jokingly remind Grace, "See, this is why you should always be suspicious of people asking for your bank details." To which Grace would always reply, with a smile that still made his heart race after all these years, "Best almost scam of my life."